I'm your friend, Isabella, but what do you want me to say? Hiring an eighth nanny in 2 months only proves that the problem isn't with them, it's with you. Your grief has become a cage. Diane's voice, coming from the speakerphone, echoed off the cold marble of the room. The emptiness of the Duarte mansion in the upscale Dallas area seemed to absorb the criticism and return it like a whip. Isabella clenched her jaw, feeling the humiliating heat rise to her face. Her life of absolute control was crumbling. 6 months ago, she was Dr. Isabella Duarte, the ruthless lawyer married to the man she loved, and with a life perfectly mapped out in spreadsheets of excellence. Now she was just the 38-year-old widow whose newborn baby, Emily, cried relentlessly, like a fire alarm that never shuts down. No babysitter could handle the shift. The sound of shrill crying came from the nursery, a constant torture that mocked her inability to be a mother. She had won every court case, but failed miserably to soothe her own son. Grief over Fernando's loss had paralyzed her soul, and now it contaminated Emily's life. Isabella swallowed her anger and pain. She knew Diane was right, and that truth hurt more than the judgment. Where was the strong woman she used to be? Where was the stability she preached in her contracts? Everything dissolved in her daughter's piercing scream. She walked to the grand piano, covered in a white sheet, a ghost of past joy. The surrounding luxury, the artwork, the view of the immaculate garden, it was all a cruel irony. The mansion was a showcase of success, but inside, it was a coffin of silence and despair. Emily's bedroom door creaked, and the newest babysitter, a nursing student, emerged with red eyes. She mumbled an excuse about an emergency and fled like the previous 7. Isabella didn't blame her. She just felt her rock bottom sinking. She looked at the crib, where Emily, just a few months old, arched her back, red and sobbing, a tiny creature of pure suffering. She tried to pick her up, but her mother's touch seemed only to intensify the baby's despair. It was a silent, constant rejection. Isabella sat in the armchair and covered her face. Fernando's emptiness was a burden, but Emily's crying was a mirror that showed her emotional bankruptcy. She was trapped in a cycle of pain, unable to give her daughter the love she needed. Last week's cleaning lady had left a note on the kitchen counter, hesitantly written, "If you need someone to calm the baby, call Rosa. She has healing hands. She's from Jalisco." Isabella tore up the paper and threw it away in anger. The idea of entrusting her daughter to an immigrant cleaning lady outside the protocol of luxury agencies was ridiculous and degrading. She, Isabella Duarte, didn't need superstitions or healing hands. She needed a logical and professional solution. But as night fell and the crying turned into a hoarse wail, Isabella reached into the trash and retrieved the crumpled note. Desperation was a terrible but effective advisor. She had to try something, anything, before the life drained from that baby. Isabella's line of reasoning screamed that hiring Rosa Martinez, a woman who only cleaned houses, to care for her daughter was an abdication of her standards, a final act of surrender. Why would a successful lawyer accept a recommendation from a cleaning lady for a babysitting job? Isabella called the hesitant number on the crumpled paper, and a deep, warm voice answered in soft Spanish. Rosa, 60, agreed to come the next day, but made it clear she would only do housework, not be a professional nanny. Isabella lied and said the baby was easy. Seeing Rosa enter the mansion, Isabella felt a shock of contrasts. Rosa wasn't wearing a uniform, but a simple cotton dress and comfortable shoes. Her skin was tanned by the sun, her gray hair pulled back, and her deep brown eyes were filled with an unexpected calm. The lawyer tried to dictate the rules, schedules, menus, and the nursery's sterile protocol, all written down in a notebook. Rosa listened silently, her head slightly tilted, taking no notes, as if the barrage of information were irrelevant noise. Isabella noticed Rosa's scent. It wasn't designer perfume, but a clean aroma of coconut soap and wet earth, something strangely familiar but unidentifiable. It was the fragrance of a real life, lived in the heat. The initial plan was simple. Rosa would clean, and during her peak crying hours, Isabella would observe her to see what the trick was. The lawyer wasn't hiring a caregiver, but a subject to study to solve a problem. However, Rosa's attitude of absolute calm disarmed Isabella. She showed no rush, no fear, and none of the nervousness that all previous nannies had displayed. She moved around the house with quiet dignity, as if each task had a sacred purpose. As Rosa cleaned the kitchen, she began to hum. It wasn't the American radio tunes Isabella was listening to, but unconditional, melancholic, and sweet, seemingly from a distant time. The music was like a balm that spread across the empty walls. Isabella tried to focus on her laptop and an urgent petition, but the sound of Rosa's voice was a magnet. It was the first music she'd heard in the house since the accident, and strangely, she didn't tell her to stop. The professional tension was beginning to ease. Late in the afternoon, Emily began to cry with her usual intensity. Isabella braced herself for a fight, but Rosa had only just finished wiping the counter. She looked at the nursery door with an expression of gentle resignation. Isabella, overcome with panic, pointed to the room. "The payment doubles if you calm her down. Just tell me how you do it." Rosa smiled at the corner of her mouth, a smile that wasn't one of joy, but of deep understanding. She didn't respond with words. Rosa simply put the cleaning cloth aside, washed her hands, and walked slowly toward the crying, like a ship heading toward a storm. Isabella followed her, disbelieving, expecting imminent failure, but feeling a disturbing curiosity. Isabella's breath stopped in the hallway. Emily's cries, that siren that had been echoing for months in her mind and throughout the rooms of the mansion, had suddenly ceased. The stillness that followed was not one of rest, but of a frightening void. Had something terrible happened? Isabella ran to the nursery door, her heart pounding in her chest, prepared for disaster. She opened the door cautiously, ready to see the usual scene, the exhausted nanny, the child flushed with anger and frustration. But what she saw froze her in the doorway. The room was bathed in soft afternoon light, and Emily, who seconds before had seemed to be having colic, was nestled in Rosa's arms. The baby was fast asleep, a small smile on her lips. Rosa sat in the rocking chair, rocking in a slow, almost imperceptible rhythm. Her eyes were closed, and she softly sang the same Spanish melody Isabella had heard earlier in the kitchen. It was a whisper, but it seemed to fill the entire universe. The song spoke of the moon and the sea, and had a cadence that soothed the soul. It was the first time since her birth that Isabella had seen her daughter at peace, not just at rest, but in a state of serene happiness. Silent tears streamed down Isabella's face. They were tears of relief and inexplicable jealousy. Why could this stranger's touch accomplish what her own mother's touch couldn't? Where was the manual for this kind of magic? She watched for a long time. Rosa seemed to embody the calm the mansion had lost. The 60-year-old immigrant radiated a strength the lawyer, with all her money and power, had never possessed. When Rosa opened her eyes and saw Isabella, she wasn't startled. She just smiled with the same deep understanding as before. She motioned for Isabella to come closer and placed her birth mother's hand on Emily's sleeping head. "She is tired, 100, Rosa whispered in her Mexican accent. "She just needed to know someone was with her, truly." Isabella recoiled, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy of the touch and the endearment in Spanish. Isabella didn't answer, just nodded and left the room, closing the door carefully. The silence that had once been one of despair was now one of mystery that forced her to think. She could no longer ignore the miracle. In the kitchen, she picked up the phone and called the pediatrician, not to fire Rosa, but to postpone the appointment. She was willing to break protocol, at least for one more night, to listen to her daughter's silence. "Isabella, I'm seeing a dangerous dependency. You need to break this routine immediately. We can't allow your daughter's well-being to depend on an..." Improvised intervention. Emily's pediatrician, Dr. Henderson, tall and in a starched white coat, looked at Isabella sternly, as if she were a stubborn defendant. Her child therapist, Dr. Miller, nodded nearby, citing theories of attachment and psychological development. Isabella tried to argue, but she's sleeping. She's eaten more this week than she has in the last 2 months. She's smiling, doctor. Her voice sounded desperate even to her own ears, a tone she would never use in a courtroom. Dr. Henderson was cold and direct. These are emotional tricks. Your baby is associating comfort with someone other than the primary mother. This can lead to serious identity issues and insecurity in the future. The protocol demands consistency, Dr. Miller added in a softer but equally condemning tone. You are seeking immediate comfort, Isabella, not long-term healing. You need to heal yourself so your daughter can feel safe in your arms, not in the arms of a maid. The weight of protocol was immense. Isabella had built her entire life around logic, reason, and obedience to established rules. Suddenly, her maternal instinct was in direct conflict with her entire belief system. She looked out the window at Rosa, who was in the garden, sitting with Emily on a blanket. Rosa rocked the baby gently and spoke to her in whispers, pointing to the colorful flowers, even though she knew the child didn't yet understand. This scene, so pure and maternal, was irrefutable evidence that the doctors were wrong, or at least incomplete in their analysis. What Rosa offered was not a trick, but a form of love that Isabella could not replicate. The lawyer tried to negotiate with the doctors. What if she just stayed as a helper for another month, just until the baby stabilized? They looked at each other and shook their heads in sync, like unyielding judges. Isabella knew that by disobeying, she was crossing a professional and social line. In Dallas, the status and conformity were everything. Allowing a woman without luxury credentials to be essential to her daughter's health was a potential scandal. Yet when she thought of removing Rosa and facing the return of crying and sadness, her stomach churned. She was attached to the peace Rosa had brought. And more than that, her daughter was attached to her. Isabella thanked the doctors, promising to consider their recommendations, but she had already made her decision. The voice of reason could shout, but Emily's silence in Rosa's arms was a stronger argument. The evidence was undeniable. Emily had an internal compass that pointed solely to Rosa. In the living room, the baby cried. Rosa entered, and it was as if the sun had risen, silencing the storm with a single presence. Isabella now found herself in a mirror game. She spent hours watching Rosa, trying to decipher the code. She tried to imitate the tone of the song, the way she swayed, the way she held Emily to her chest. She failed miserably. One afternoon, Isabella tried the bean soup Rosa had made, a simple Mexican dish that smelled of comfort. She tried to imitate the seasoning, but the result was pale and soulless. Instinct couldn't be bought, nor could it be copied from a manual. The internal struggle was excruciating. Isabella, the lawyer, saw the situation as a risk, a security breach that needed to be eliminated. Isabella, the mother, weary, saw the situation as the only lifeline for her daughter and her own sanity. She began making excuses for Rosa's continued presence, increasing her salary and inventing tasks that didn't exist, just to ensure Rosa was close enough to Emily. Protocol went out the window. Isabella found herself smiling for the first time in months, watching Emily laugh as Rosa made funny faces at her. It was a second-hand happiness, but it was real, and it was the only light that entered her darkness. The lawyer knew she was betraying the memory of her husband, who had always prioritized order and luxury. Fernando would never have allowed such an informal and unorthodox cure for his daughter. The weight of guilt crushed her. Rosa didn't try to force affection. She was simply there, present, with an unshakable calm. She cooked for Isabella, cleaned her clothes, and, without ever asking, provided the kind of support the lawyer didn't know she needed. One night, Isabella was exhausted and crying silently on the sofa. Rosa entered the room, didn't say a word, just sat down beside her and handed her a cup of steaming chamomile tea. The gesture was one of unprecedented intimacy. "Grief is heavy, 100, Rosa said softly. "But it cannot be stronger than your love. The girl knows when you are suffering. She feels your fear." Isabella felt completely naked before that simple wisdom. Isabella sipped her tea, accepting the wordless comfort. Her maternal instinct had prevailed. Professional logic was lost. She depended on Rosa as much as Emily did, and that dependency was dangerous and irresistible territory. The steam from Rosa's bean soup filled the kitchen, carrying with it more than just the aroma of the stew. It was an ancient smell, a trigger for memories that Isabella wasn't sure were hers, but which hit her with the force of already seen electrifying. Isabella stood at the counter in her designer kitchen, pretending to read emails, but secretly inhaling the scent of food. It was the smell of a warm home, of a simple life, something that contrasted sharply with the sterility of her upbringing. The melody that Rosa sang to Emily, the old song, began to manifest in Isabella's mind at random moments. She found herself humming the rhythm in the shower, without knowing the Spanish, just the cadence. One night, she watched Rosa hold Emily in a very particular way, with the baby's head nestled precisely in the curve of her shoulder. The gesture was so natural, so perfect, that Isabella felt a shiver. She remembered an old photograph, but couldn't place the face. These sensations were like breadcrumbs in the darkness, leading Isabella to a place she didn't know, but that felt like home. What lay behind that simple woman? Why did her presence unravel the tapestry of her life? Isabella had been adopted by a wealthy family in Chicago and had always known it. Her adoptive parents, formal and distant, never hid the truth, but always presented it clinically. You are special, chosen. Despite the perfect narrative, Isabella always felt a void, a blind spot in her story. Now Rosa, the woman who was only supposed to clean the rooms, was filling that void with the warmth of her hands and the flavor of her food. One morning, while tidying Rosa's drawer, Isabella found a small, old oxidized medal of Our Lady. On the back were two faintly engraved initials. ID. Your initials. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. It was a coincidence, of course. The initials were common, but the intensity of her reaction was disproportionate. She hid the medal in the palm of her hand and tucked it into her dress pocket. The weight of suspicion was unbearable. Isabella wanted to ask Rosa, wanted to demand the truth, but the fear of destroying Emily's newfound peace held her back. She was caught between the desire to know and the need to protect. The silence was tense, more piercing than any scream. Isabella held the medal of Our Lady in her hand, the cold, ancient silver burning her palm. She had waited all night, and now, at dawn, she was ready for war. Isabella confronted Rosa in the kitchen before Emily woke up. "What is this?" she demanded, throwing the medal onto the granite countertop. The small object rolled, and Rosa stopped grinding the coffee, her eyes immediately focused on the initials, ID. Rosa paled. Her calm smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of terror and resignation. She tried to take the medal, but Isabella stopped her with an abrupt gesture. The lawyer was in attack mode, relentless. "Don't lie to me, Rosa," Isabella hissed, her voice low and controlled, but filled with fury. "Why does my daughter only trust you? What's different about you? Why does your touch soothe me? What do you know about me?" Rosa hesitated, looking for a way out that didn't exist. "It's the smell, 100, the affection. It is the energy of the house." Her voice trembled, and she avoided Isabella's piercing gaze. The lie was obvious, fragile as glass. "Don't use your Mexican folklore on me," Isabella exploded, the rage of abandonment she hadn't even known she carried erupting. "I'm a lawyer, Rosa. I detect half-truths. Answer me. Who are you really?" Tension hung in the air, so thick it was almost suffocating. Rosa clasped her hands together, staring at the ground, seeming to shrink under the weight of the accusation. She was fragility personified in the face of Isabella's calculated fury. Isabella realized that Rosa wasn't just a simple maid, but a woman carrying a huge secret, a weight that weighed heavily on her shoulders. She held no malice, only a deep fear. The lawyer tried a new, crueler angle. Are you using my daughter to get into my life? Are you taking advantage of my grief? I'll call immigration if you're not honest. Tears streamed down Rosa's scarred face. She finally lifted her head, and the look she gave Isabella wasn't that of a maid to her mistress, but of wrenching maternal pain. The truth was about to be torn apart. Isabella took a step back, stunned by the intensity of her emotion. She knew she had gone too far, but it was too late. The silence demanded confession, and the past, now exposed, was ready to speak. The sound was guttural, coming from deep within Rosa's soul, a sob that broke the morning's tension with the force of thunder. They weren't tears of fear about immigration, but of pain held for decades. The lawyer watched her collapse. Rosa collapsed into a chair, covering her face with her calloused hands. "Don't call the police, please. I'll tell them. I'll tell you. But please, don't expel me before you hear me out." The plea was desperate. Isabella felt a chill run down her spine, a premonition that overcame any fear. She remained silent, waiting for the bomb to drop, prepared for manipulation, but receiving only fragility. "I'm your mother. Your biological mother, Isabella," Rosa confessed in a barely audible whisper, looking up at her with eyes filled with guilt and love. "Your name was Isabella, with 2 L's. I called you that." The mansion seemed to spin around Isabella. The world of legal certainty and luxury crumbled in an instant. The smell of the soup, the cadence of the song, Emily's touch, it all made a horrible, devastating sense. Rosa continued crying, explaining her story quickly in a mix of Spanish and English. The poverty, the disease at the border, the cruelty of her biological father who abandoned her, the lack of documents. Giving up the baby was the only way to ensure her survival. "I gave you to a family of doctors in Chicago. I begged them to give you everything I couldn't, and they did. I never forgot you. I looked for you, and when the cleaning lady called me, I knew." Isabella couldn't speak. The shock was physical, a pain that came from her womb, from her original abandonment. The wound she'd tried to bury with diplomas and wealth was open, raw, bleeding. Her eyes met Rosa's, and she saw there not the maid, but the poor, hurt, young version of herself. She saw the pain of surrender and the love that had never died. But that love came at the price of abandonment. The lawyer pressed her forehead together, trying to process the information. Her biological mother was there, in her kitchen, cleaning her clothes and caring for her daughter. The irony was brutal, the pain unbearable. "I'm a lawyer, Rosa, and I understand the law of abandonment. You signed it, you turned me in. Don't come to me now with excuses of poverty or cruelty. In my eyes, you abandoned me. And it's not my past you want. It's my money." Isabella's accusation, delivered with the coldness of a court sentence, cut Rosa deeper than any knife. The pain on the older woman's face was palpable, but Isabella's fury was uncontrollable. "I don't want anything. I just wanted to see you okay, to see your daughter. I just wanted to clean your house and know you were alive," Rosa pleaded, tears cascading down her face. "I just needed to know." "You've seen it," Isabella shouted, pointing to the door with a trembling hand. "Now go! Get out of my house and never come back. You're a stranger who invaded my life with a lie." The pain Isabella felt was the pain of a wounded child who finally has the chance to confront the parental figure who rejected her. It was the anger of a lifetime of uncertainty that exploded in a single moment. Rosa tried to touch Isabella's arm, an instinctive gesture of comfort. Isabella jerked away, as if her touch burned her. The bond that had slowly built over the past few weeks was destroyed in seconds. The lawyer didn't give her a chance to argue. She grabbed Rosa's purse, threw the month's pay on the table, and forced her out the front door. The dismissal was an act of emotional and professional violence. Rosa, her dignity wounded but her head held high, picked up her purse. Her eyes lingered one last time on the nursery door, and she left the mansion without another word, taking her calm with her. Isabella closed the door with a bang that echoed in the silent house and collapsed to the floor, crying convulsively. She had driven away the only person who had brought peace to her life, but she felt she had done the right thing, cutting the root of her pain. The silence in the mansion returned, but it wasn't the serene silence of Chapter 3. It was the deafening silence of loneliness and guilt, waiting patiently in the hallway. Emily's crying began again, more desperate and sickening than ever. Without Rosa, Emily began to waste away again. She refused bottles, wouldn't sleep for more than 20 minutes at a time, and her body shrank, becoming too small for her age. Her pediatrician was concerned about her weight loss. Isabella tried everything. He hired 2 new nannies simultaneously, applied every therapy protocol, but nothing worked. Emily just cried, with a soulful lament that seemed to be asking for the woman who calmed her. The lawyer was exhausted and frightened. She looked at her daughter and saw the direct consequences of her anger and rejection. She had prioritized her personal pain over her baby's health, and now the weight of guilt was suffocating. She avoided the kitchen. The smell of coconut soap and wet earth had disappeared, replaced by the cold metallic aroma of industrial cleaning. The house was clean, but soulless, and Isabella felt increasingly isolated. Isabella tried to sing the old song, the melody in Spanish, but the words wouldn't come, and the rhythm on her lips sounded false, mechanical. Emily wasn't fooled, crying even louder when she heard the cheap imitation. The lawyer was losing the battle on all fronts. Her work was behind schedule, her clients were calling, and she could barely get out of bed. Her professional armor had cracked, and she was drowning. She dreamed of Rosa, of the soft sound of Spanish, of bean soup. She woke in a panic, feeling the emptiness and the double loss, the mother she had found again and the peace she had destroyed. The letterhead, cold and official, arrived in a manila envelope, deposited next to the daily newspapers. It wasn't a court summons, but something far worse, a notification from Dallas County Social Services. Panic chilled Isabella to the bone. Dr. Miller, the child therapist, had taken action. Concerned about Emily's condition and the child's sudden regression, she had contacted the authorities, citing emotional abandonment and maternal inability to ensure the baby's physical well-being. Isabella, the lawyer who always controlled every variable, saw her worst nightmare come true. The system she used to defend others was now attacking her, and she was the defendant, without sufficient arguments to defend herself. Her reputation was at risk, but that was secondary. Her real fear was losing Emily, her only remaining connection to Fernando, and the only reason she was still standing. She had to fight. The notice demanded a preliminary custody hearing within a week. Isabella immediately called her office, mounting the most complex defense of her career, her own. She would attempt to argue with reports, medical exams, and the law. She was convinced that logic would prevail. She had the resources, a track record of excellence, and could prove she was simply grieving. But deep down, she knew her failure to calm Emily was the irrefutable evidence against her. While reviewing the documents, she found the crumpled note with Rosa's number on it. A wave of despair hit her. Rosa was the problem, but ironically, Rosa was also the only solution he could offer. The lawyer hesitated, her finger on the number. Calling Rosa was admitting that logic had lost its meaning and that her heart, wounded and rejected, was the only thing that mattered. But she didn't call. Her pride was still too strong. The courthouse's smell of disinfectant and waste paper was the antithesis of the luxurious perfume of the Duarte mansion. But Isabella was there, wearing her best lawyer's blazer, ready to fight for her daughter's life. She was about to suffer her first defeat. In the austere room, Isabella spoke about her financial stability, her clinically diagnosed grief, and the medical protocols she was following. She cited articles of law and medical reports. Her argument was impeccable but cold. As she spoke, Emily was in the arms of a social worker. The baby was thin and pale, and her cries had turned into a hoarse scream, a wail of helplessness that tore at the hearts of everyone in the room. The judge, a tired, elderly woman, shook her head. "Doctor Duarte, your reports are excellent, but your daughter's behavior is the only testimony that matters. She is wasting away. We need a solution that goes beyond arguments." At that moment, Emily sobbed and screamed with renewed force, stretching her arms toward something Isabella couldn't see. That scream, so full of pain, shattered Isabella's mask of professionalism. The lawyer stopped talking. She looked at Emily and for the first time saw the child, not the case. She saw the reflection of her own pain, amplified in her daughter's fragile body. She had lost Fernando. She had lost her peace, and she was about to lose Emily. Suddenly, his eyes fell on someone sitting at the back of the room, in the public area. It was Rosa Martinez, dressed in the same simple dress, but her face etched with worry and sadness. Rosa was there in the courtroom, somehow knowing what was happening, willing to risk everything just to know. Rosa's eyes were filled with tears of empathy, not judgment. Isabella realized the most important truth. She had tried to conquer the world alone, with the law. But the only law that mattered now was love. She had driven away her only salvation, her mother, and it was costing her daughter her life. The prosecution's attorney began speaking, requesting temporary custody. Isabella's desperation reached its peak. She had a choice: the law or her life, pride or reconciliation. Isabella's voice, which had been quoting codes and statutes moments before, tore through the silence of the courtroom with a primal sound, charged with pain and redemption. She threw away the reports, letting them fall to the floor with a dull thud. "Stop!" she shouted, not to the judge, but to the world. The courtroom froze, startled by the impeccable lawyer's sudden breach of decorum. Isabella took a deep breath, and her emotional barriers dissolved. Tears flowed freely, washing away her makeup and arrogance. She was no longer Dr. Duarte, but simply a desperate mother. The only way to save Emily was to tell her the complete truth, without mincing words. She pointed her finger, not to incriminate, but to summon Rosa, who sat in the back row, her head bowed. The focus of everyone present turned to the simple woman. "That woman! She's not a threat! She's not a stranger!" Isabella screamed, her voice cracking. "She's the only reason my daughter is still alive, the only one who can put her to sleep." The judge frowned. "Who is this lady, Dr. Duarte? Please stay focused." "She's my mother," Isabella screamed, her words heavy with the weight of 40 years of silence. "She gave me up for adoption and abandoned me in misery, but today she's here, and today she's also the only one my daughter recognizes as her mother." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. It was a silence heavy with revelation, the breaking of a decades-long chain, the raw truth of a story of abandonment and reunion told in the most formal setting in the world. Rosa lifted her head, and her eyes met Isabella's. There was no longer any anger or rejection, only a silent plea for forgiveness. The lawyer had sacrificed her pride to defend her heart. The judge, after a long moment, cleared her throat. "I suspend the hearing. I demand that both parties, Dr. Duarte and Ms. Martinez, convene in my chambers. This is not a legal matter, it's a family matter." Isabella's decision in court wasn't a legal maneuver, it was an oath. She chose her heart over her reputation. The fight that followed was no longer against social services, but against her own past, to keep Rosa in her life and Emily's. The first conversation in the judge's office was tense and tearful. Isabella, who always knew how to argue, could barely speak, simply apologizing for her cruel behavior on the day of her expulsion. Rosa, calmer but visibly shaken, simply hugged the daughter she had lost twice. The hug didn't heal decades of abandonment, but it was the first step toward healing the wound. The judge issued an ultimatum. Isabella would retain custody, but Rosa would be officially hired as a permanent caregiver under the supervision of social services. It was a chance, but it required public acknowledgement of the relationship. Isabella accepted immediately. She returned to the mansion no longer as the mistress, but as the daughter begging for forgiveness. The mansion, once a mausoleum, began to breathe again. The hardest moment was the first "Mom" Isabella had to say. It was forced, choked, full of embarrassment and pain. "Rosa," Isabella corrected. "I call her Rosa. I can't." Rosa smiled, a sad, patient smile. "Okay, 100. One day the true name will come. I love you, Isabella. And I will love your daughter as if she were my granddaughter because she is." The bond with Emily was restored in seconds. The baby, smelling the familiar scent and touch, fell asleep peacefully in Rosa's arms. The baby's healing mirrored the mother's healing. Isabella began learning Spanish, asking Rosa for recipes, listening to stories of Mexico. She was filling the void in her identity, embracing the part of herself that was humble and warm. The most beautiful sound in the Duarte mansion was no longer the imposed silence, nor the desperate crying, but the sound of Emily's laughter, echoing in the garden, free and happy. Mourning had finally given way to reconciliation. Months after the hearing, life fell into place. Emily, now a healthy, radiant child, ran across the green grass of her Dallas garden, the sun in her hair. Rosa was always there, a constant and unwavering presence. She was more than a caregiver. She was the grandmother Isabella never knew she needed, the missing link to her roots. Isabella sat on the porch, watching them. She was no longer wearing her blazer but comfortable clothes, and the stress had melted away. She had rediscovered motherhood through her own mother. One afternoon, Emily stumbled and whimpered. Rosa picked her up and comforted her with her hand. Old song. When Rosa put the baby down, Emily ran, not to the garden, but to Isabella. "Mommy," Emily cried, hugging Isabella's leg. And then, looking at Rosa, she said the word, "Abuela Rosa." It was confirmation that the new family was complete. Isabella looked at Rosa, and for the first time, the word came naturally, effortlessly, full of love and relief. "Thank you, Mother." Rose smiled, her eyes welling up, and the two hugged. The lawyer who lived by arguments and laws had discovered that the only law capable of saving and healing was that of unconditional love. The mansion was filled, not with luxury, but with life, with the scent of spices and ancient melodies. Did you enjoy this story of healing and reconnection? If you were moved by Isabella and Rosa's journey, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the continuation of this and other moving stories. Remember, your greatest strength lies not in what you control, but in what you allow yourself to feel and forgive. Unconditional love is the bridge that connects your grief to your new life.